Anunnaki, what do you think?
Well, what I believe, and I've been asked this before, and I differ with Sitchin's theories only because my worldview is kind of a Judeo-Christian, biblical, ancient manuscripts of the Hebrews worldview. And the reason why I hang my intellectual hat on that is because of the thread of prophecy that's there. And the prophetic word, just to give your viewers an idea, it would be like looking at a parade in a helicopter. The Supreme Being's in the helicopter. He can see the first float, he can see the last float. Tracy, you and I are on the ground. We're looking at the floats go by, and there goes Mickey Mouse. We see the beginning of the one that just, that's coming towards us, the Mickey Mouse one here and the one that just went by. The Supreme Being in the helicopter sees the whole parade. So it's nothing for him, since he's outside the space-time continuum as we know it, to tell us, because time doesn't exist for him, to tell us what's going to happen. And he does this continually throughout those ancient Hebrew manuscripts, and then what later become first century Christian manuscripts. That thread of prophecy is continued. And the prophetic word is accurate. That's why I believe those stories, let's say rather than the Chumash mythos or the mythos of the Sumerians, that's why I believe it. That's why I hold them in higher regard than the mythos of the Sumerians or the Chumash or the Eskimos, or the Hopis, take your pick.
Right. And of course, ancient Sumeria is modern day Iraq.
Correct.
And I heard a rumor that Saddam Hussein was actually calling himself the reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar. Yes. Yeah. What do you think about that?
I think that there's, in present-day Iraq, you have the ancient city of Babylon. Babylon is mentioned in the Hebrew scriptures. It's the antithesis of Jerusalem. You've got two thought lines, two world systems. You have the Jerusalem system, and you've got the Babylonian system. Right. Babylon became a ruin, but Saddam has poured literally billions of dollars into the rebuilding of Babylon. What's interesting, you never hear word one on any of the media, on any of the news outlets about Babylon, and there it is in southern Iraq. There's a spirit, and this gets a little spooky perhaps, there's an entity, there's a spirit, there's what I believe a demonic force over that region. It has been there for thousands and thousands of years, and has never been removed. Really? So the ancient evil is there, is dwelling over the land. My text for this would be from the book of Daniel. We talked about that earlier before the show. But for your viewers, Daniel was a prophet that lived thousands of years ago. He shoots off a prayer, he shoots off a request, and it takes this angelic being, a good angel, 21 days to get to him. Earth time, 21 days. And you say to yourself, well, what was going on? There was a war, there was a conflict. And the angel, when he appears to Daniel, says, I left the moment you uttered your prayer, I left. But the Prince of Persia withstood me, and I had to go get reinforcements and help and come back. And, I don't know what that warfare looks like. Do they throw balls of light at each other? Do they fight with swords? I have no clue, no clue. No one does. It's all conjecture. But there was a battle between the forces, and he lands. The thing is that Prince of Persia has never been removed. It's still there. For thousands of years, it's still there. Wow. And that's why all this stuff with Iraq, I believe, has such incredible consequence and links directly to the ancient text and the ancient prophetic word.
Right. Do you believe that these giants could have created the pyramids, Lynn? What do you think? There's
a friend of mine, Patty Heron, who's written a great book on that, the Nephilim and the Pyramid Apocalypse. And he believes that if I'm getting this right, he believes that the Nephilim constructed the pyramid. I have a slightly different viewpoint. I believe when what Clarence Larkin says, I believe that it's a marker, something the ancient manuscripts point to, that some of this building, for instance, Baalbek, if I can steer away from the pyramids for a second, in Baalbek you have these huge stones, weighing hundreds of thousands of tons, just they're mammoth, and no one knows how they got there, one. Two, the legend says that the giants built Baalbek. You can't go to it today because it's in the Bekaa Valley, and the Bekaa Valley is completely overrun with Syrian terrorists and all this other stuff. You can't get there. something, Zawi Hawass, the director of the Supreme Egyptian Antiquities, believes that the Egyptians, his ancestors, built the pyramid. But so far, in my opinion, no one's really come up with a theory. The ramp theory with the sand would be the ramp would take longer than to build a pyramid. The casing stones are, the tolerance between them are like, some of them like 1/100th of an inch, if my figures are right. And this thing, the sarcophagus in the king's chamber, there's no lid, there's no hieroglyphs, there's nothing. So the pyramid is definitely an enigma. There are other people who believe that the Grand Gallery, which leads to the king's chamber, is actually some sort of a prophetic timeline, which predicts the end of the earth. There's been several books that I've read on that. My verdict is still out. I think Patty Heron has a great theory. I think his book is well worth reading. There's a plug for you, Patty, but it's well worth reading, and it's an interesting theory. I believe that perhaps the good guys might have built it. I believe the opposite.
The opposite.
As a marker. But we don't know. And we certainly don't know how it was constructed.
Well, I'll tell you a little story, and our audience probably know this. We had on our show several months ago Larry Hunter, who's an Egyptologist. And we did a fascinating two-part show with Larry. Larry has a friend who's a fellow Egyptologist who lives in Egypt. And he managed to get below the plateau of Giza, under the houses. And what he found below in the tunnel was a giant. A 13-foot giant, intact, that had died, lying with its face on its arm, clothed, fully clothed. And he's going to go back and he's going to try and get photographs.
Can you link me up with him after the show?
I will link you up with Larry. I will link you up with Larry. But he's known as the bad boy of Egyptology.
That's good. I like that.
Because
he gets something done.
Yeah, and he's totally going against Zawas. And his theory. That's he's totally going against him. So he's going to try and go back and get photographs.
And that ties right in with the giants and the Nephilim and everything. Ties in with Patty's theory, very, very much so.
You see,
how interesting.
How many more are under there?
Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah. They think they found one of the Ark of the Covenants, and just sidestepping here a little bit, the body of Osiris in the fourth level of the Great Pyramid. Intact, skin on the bone. And his Egyptologist friend has said on the 2 occasions he's crawled in there to see him, his skin is getting stronger. He is getting stronger as a being. He has a pink robe, he has Egyptian epaulets on the shoulders, he has long grey hair, he has a moustache like Hitler, he has some kind of light force field around him. And I said, well, this can only suggest one thing. He's in suspended animation.
Could be. Interesting.
He said, I think exactly the same thing.
Very far out stuff. Very far out.
So
very interesting.
I just wanted to throw that giant story in there because they are out there. And when I came to the country in 2001, on Coast to Coast, I heard of a gentleman who had found at the bottom of the Grand Canyon 2 giants. I think they were in the region of 10 to 12 feet tall, long red hair. Long red hair. Double rows of teeth.
Right. 6 fingers, 6 digits on the toes, right.
And I think the Smithsonian came in and took them.
There's one person, and again, this is all email. I can't verify this at all, but it was the type of a thing where I've got information to tell you, Mr. Marzulli. So right away, it's like, okay, it's like an X-Files thing. And I get this a lot. But this one person never gave me their real name, but said that she worked for the government, and there was apparently a rainstorm, a deluge in the Hopi Reservation, and it washed away this ancient burial ground that no one knew existed, and there were skeletons of giants. And the Smithsonian came in, packed these things up in crates. She had to sign a paper saying that, sign a secrecy paper, because the thing is, it doesn't fit in with the whole idea of coming over the Arctic land or the land bridge and all that. It doesn't fit in. It doesn't fit their time level or their time frame rather. And so, if we have giants like that in America with red hair, it's like, where did they come from?
Where did they come from?
And of course, in my opinion, the answer to that is it's the Nephilim.
Right. Why do you think they are here? Why do you think they're returning?
Yeah, we need to get into the jump. The jump is simply this, that in the book of Enoch, which we talked about earlier, which parallels the book of Genesis, but it certainly amplifies it. in a great deal. It talks about this one figure, this one interdimensional being who comes on the earth, and that the name of that person, or that entity, I should say, is Semyaza. Okay?
Or some may know it as Semyazi.
Semyazi.
Linked with Billy Meier.
Correct.
And the sightings.
There's, I believe, a linguistic link between the Book of Enoch and Edward Billy Meier's book. Because in 1976, I believe, when he published that book, it was the alleged Pleiadian cosmonaut Semyaza, Semyazi, who appeared to him. So one of my first discoveries was in 1991-92, and reading the Book of Enoch and having the Meier book in my library. When I saw the Semyaza name in the Book of Enoch, it rang bells. There's a couple of answers here. It begs the question, did Billy Meier have access to the Book of Enoch and just lift the name because it sounded good? Or, in fact, are we looking at an interdimensional being that existed for thousands of years and has somehow reappeared? I believe that what we're looking at are interdimensional beings, which are accessing the planet again. And I believe that they were able to do this through one event. There's a book called The Twisted Cross by Joseph Carr. Mandatory reading for anybody who wants to get into this, the UFO thing. It was deliberate. I believe somehow that cracked open a portal.
Interesting.
And through that portal came the first sightings. Now, we've had sightings throughout history. We all know that. 1913 Fatima, we could talk about that a little later maybe, but in 1945, at the end of the war, the airmen on the United States side and also the Russian side the Americans labeled them Foo Fighters because they didn't know what these things were. Right. And I believe this is the new advent, if I can use that term, of the reemergence of these fallen angels intermingling once again on the earth. And of course, they have a breeding program. Dr. Jacobs' books highlights that. Secret Life, for instance, talks about that breeding program. My books, the Nephilim Trilogy, talk about that breeding program. We trace an abductee who has been abducted through at the time she was 4 years old until present day when she's in her 20s, and she just wants to get rid of this. And she finally finds a way to stop her abductions, which I believe can happen, but you've got to know what to do. Right,
which we will get into that a little bit later as well, Lynn. I would never, ever have thought of it as some kind of deception. But the more I hear, and especially about the abductions and how the abductions occur, that is pointing, I think, in that direction, that we are perhaps being deceived.
No, I agree. I think the abductions are very malevolent. Any entity or any person, human or otherwise, that comes into a room and abducts a 10-year-old and takes them away, I mean, that's kidnapping, that's abduction, and then sexually molest them. I mean, they'd be locked up and throw away the key in this country. And yet that's exactly what the abductees report that these alien creatures do. They take them, they're in a state of paralysis, they find themselves aboard a ship, on a table, painful, gynecological if it's a female, or sometimes it's in the rectum if it's a male, whatever, but they go through very, very painful, there's no anesthetic, needles in the eyes, I mean, all sorts of crazy stuff. And these creatures seem to have no compassion. There's also, when they look in their eyes, there's like a mind link that happens, and they communicate telepathically. Right. And in my opinion, what we're looking at are fallen beings. We're looking at fallen angels who have degressed, de-evolved in their state. They are wicked beyond anything. And they are coming on the earth. There's an ancient scripture, almost 2,000 years old, from one of the ancient manuscripts from the 1st century. And it talks about that in the end days, in the latter times, that there would be signs, great signs and lying wonders would come upon the planet. And when you look at that text and you think about it, that, we say, well, maybe that's just a metaphor, or, what does that really mean? And most people don't even know what that means. Most people don't even ponder and think about it. Great signs and lying wonders, in my opinion, will be what I believe the coming great deception will be the UFO phenomenon. When they actually manifest themselves on the planet for all mankind to see, it'll be a paradigm shift. They will present, and I'm actually working on a book called The Coming Great Deception, or The Luciferian Endgame. They will present what I believe is called, and I've labeled, the alien gospel, which is simply this, that we, the aliens, were humankind's progenitors. We manipulated you about 20 to 30,000 years ago from primitive man and gave you this leap forward.